ご機嫌いかがですか？渡辺なんです。On today's episode, we're going to talk about when the industry jumped the shark. Now, there's no correct answer as to when the entertainment industry actually jumped the shark, or if it even did jump the shark, but I'm going to present a number of different opinions as to when that might happen. Today's opinion is that that happened in 1993. What happened in 1993? Well, Congress blinked and the financial interest and syndication rules were allowed to sunset. Now, what were the financial interest and syndication rules? In the 1970s, there was a lot of fear that the networks were becoming vertically integrated monopolies. And so Congress stepped in and said that a network could not own more than 2 runs of a show. Yes, they would pay for it, or pay for most of it. But after those 2 runs, the individual producers would own the show to be able to do with whatever they would like in the future. And that included reruns and syndication. So this was a big windfall for those independent producers, such as Norman Lear, such as Aaron Spelling, such as Stephen J. Cannell, who were able to put up with the venture capital and the risk of shooting a series that wouldn't come up with 100 episodes and would then be a dead asset. Now, in 1993, what happened was that there was a lot of competition to the old hegemony of having only 3 networks. First of all, a new network had come in, Fox. And because Fox was not covered in over 90% of the country, it did not have to adhere to the same standards and practices rules that the other 3 networks did. Therefore, they could have content that was just a little bit more explicit. Hence, Married with Children and programs like that. Then there was the rise of home video, which allowed people to watch movies and other things whenever they wanted. And not only that, they could see them uncensored. And to a large degree, even though this was before DVD, you had the option, if you so desired, to see them in their original aspect ratio through higher end technologies such as Laserdiscs. And finally, you had the number of independent cable networks that came up that definitely was splitting the audience. So the networks actually had a listening, because that was very different, and they did give a good indication that without this, they would just not be able to economically remain viable. In fact, NBC notoriously said, you don't think that we would put a block against getting the best programmers? Of course. Just because we have an ownership stake doesn't mean that we're going to stop the best producers from being able to do what they do best. And of course, people believe that, which, you got a bridge in Brooklyn that we want to sell you. So no sooner did Congress decide to let those rules sunset than it was that self-same NBC that said, we will not put on a show unless we have 50% ownership. And by the way, we're going to still expect you to deficit the same amount you did before. Guess what that meant? Yeah, a lot of the biggest producers of that time said, fine, we're taking our ball and going home. You clearly don't want to play fair. You clearly don't want to be in business. You clearly just want to take it all and leave us holding the bag if it doesn't work. Unfortunately, this particular decree hit at the same time that, even though it would take a while before the official rules were sunset, the Paramount decrees of 1948 really stopped being enforced. Now, what were the Paramount decrees of 1948? The Paramount decrees were a series of rulings that said that the entertainment industry was too much of a vertical monopoly. It had the ability to produce, distribute, and exhibit all of their product. And because of that, there was no ability to have any serious competition. So the studios and the theaters were separated. Now, this is often taught that the studios lost their theaters. The truth was, in most of the big instances, particularly MGM and Paramount and Warner Brothers, the theaters owned the studios. So what was really happening was they lost their source of funding, which was actually much worse. So what happened in the early 90s was that was no longer going to be forbidden. At least it wasn't going to be prosecuted. So what happened? The Walt Disney Company bought ABC, and they took what NBC had threatened an additional step further. And what they decreed was that they were going to make every show that was going to appear on ABC. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Anyway, at that time, Michael Eisner, just like Bob Iger today, overreached. And what ended up happening was that Disney ended up nearly destroying ABC by running bad shows. Instead of 6 episodes, 22 episodes in an attempt to fix it, because they didn't want to lose the money from their investment in the show. Well, guess what? If something's bad in your first 3 episodes and you had it as a 6 and out, you were at the most blowing maybe $6 million. You carry that out to 22 episodes and it still sucks. You're still going to have to cancel it because the advertisers aren't advertising and the show is a dog. Now multiply that out over multiple shows and you can see why Disney felt it was okay to pay off Mike Ovitz, whom they had paid an incredible fortune to come over from CAA, Creative Artist Agency, to run the new ABC and Disney franchise. $100 million to just go away. The only thing that saved ABC at that time was the fact that they brought over an import show from the UK called Millionaire, where it was a game show where the top prize was winning $1 million. And that show became a sensation. Disney, of course, ran the sprockets off of it and destroyed it by overexposure. But during the time that show was being run, it became such a sensation that it saved the network. By the way, this always happens. There's always something that comes out of nowhere and ultimately rescues the industry. So we're just waiting for that to happen again. Now, why do I feel that this was such a cataclysmic event? It wasn't just those 2 things that created the problem. The thing that created the problem was that this allowed Wall Street into the entertainment industry in the form of mergers and acquisitions. So all of a sudden, the entertainment industry wasn't this weird, quixotic, crazy industry that no one with any common sense would put a lot of money into because the risk was so high, and sometimes the rewards could be so low. I mean, you spend X number of dollars to build a washing machine factory, that washing machine factory is going to be kicking off washing machines for a long time and more than make up for the capital investment you made in it. You can spend that same amount of money on one movie like a Waterworld and it would just be burned. So Wall Street had never been interested in delving in. This made them interested. Now, this created all sorts of side events. So the first and perhaps most cataclysmic of them, and maybe this is because this was my ox being gored, what ended up happening was that as Wall Street came in, they wanted to make sure that their people were in charge. So all of a sudden, pretty much, and it took attrition, but pretty much the development executives, that mid-level management in development, distribution, marketing, were replaced by Wall Street high-end graduates from Ivy League universities who didn't necessarily love movies, didn't necessarily understand the process of making movies, but did have connections to venture capital. So all of a sudden, what had been to be honest, a much more diverse, if we have to go down that road, workforce than we had today was almost immediately eliminated. You used to have this phrase, D girls, because many of these executives were women. Well, for almost a decade, there were no D girls. It was almost all a Caucasian male. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it was Caucasian males running development in a Wall Street manner, meaning development by PowerPoint, instead of looking to see what was the best script, what was the best project that you could do. It was all about checking certain boxes. And those boxes at that time were tentpole boxes. What major male star do you have in the lead? What major director is going to direct it? Budget stopped being a consideration. Does that sound familiar again? And instead, it was all about doing something that could be easily summarized in a PowerPoint. And this led to the far greater damage of not having that distinction of multiple different creative voices. At the time, you actually had the development departments having plenty of Asians and Latinos and others in those middle management positions, and they were bringing all of that in. But with these new decrees, they didn't want that. They only wanted people who were part of the club. The club being those elites from the Ivy League who didn't necessarily come from loving movies or TV, but did come from being able to do good PowerPoints and do good presentations and wear the right slick Versace suits and all of that. And that is where the problem came, because almost overnight, you saw three renaissances that were very, very much in the process of happening being kiboshed. What were those renaissances? Well, one of them is actually two. There were two Black renaissances in motion pictures going on at that time. One of them was led by the Spike Lee and John Singletons, who made movies that, quite frankly, had predominant appeal to upper class, let's face it, Caucasian audiences who could go to those movies and feel that they were down with the homies, so to speak. But there was another simultaneous one that was led by Marvin Van Peebles, son of Melvin Van Peebles, who was making very, very hardcore blaxploitation movies in the 70s that were really not meant for Caucasian audiences to feel good about if they saw them. They were very Sweetback's Badass Song and all of that. Well, Van Peebles was making movies like New Jack City, which were very unapologetic and didn't have this kind of not necessarily feel good, but cathartic side to them that the Spike Lee and the John Singleton movies had. And so you had that success. You also had a very successful series of Hispanic Latino movies that were being done. These were largely made by independent voices, although many of them were in studios, such as La Bamba, such as Stand and Deliver, such as American Me, such as the original version of Selena. Now, all of these were done for fairly moderate budgets, but were scoring very, very well in terms of the return on investment. So there really was a reason to keep that kind of film going, but that didn't happen. That particular style of filmmaking was going to be eliminated as well as the two Black renaissances. The third was an Asian renaissance, and that renaissance was based on two things, but this one will combine into one, and that was the New Art had started showing Asian movies at night, at midnight, and among the movies that they were showing were Jackie Chan movies and Once Upon a Time in China and all these other things, and they were so successful that they started doing other Asian movie film festivals, often with the original Asian print. So you have the English subtitles that were kind of dictionary English, that kind of off. plus the Mandarin Chinese and then the simplified Chinese. So it was 3 sets of subtitles that you would be looking at. But these were enormously successful. So Jackie Chan, John Woo, and other filmmakers were brought over, and they were having a modicum of success as well. And the fourth, and perhaps most surprising, was the rise of gay and lesbian low-budget films that were performing relatively well with the mainstream audience, especially in the post-AIDS period. I mean, yes, you had Parting Glances, which was in '84, mainly a movie that gay men went to, but it was still enough of an audience to take this $50,000 film and give it a huge return on investment. You also had Harvey Fierstein's Torch Song Trilogy, and you had other films that were scoring, maybe not in the same kind of numbers as the ethnic films, but they were still making money and kind of led to Ellen being able to come out in the Ellen DeGeneres show. So there was that. And we won't even mention that an entire swath of industry films, which were the A films, which usually had a female star in the center, dominated by the Meryl Streeps and Susan Sarandons and Waiting to Exhales of the day. All of those types of films disappeared more or less in favor of the franchise. Yes, Harvey Weinstein kind of took over that slot and would make art films so that the industry could still claim credibility in that. But let's face it, Harvey Weinstein was a one-man show. Everyone else was blocked out except for him. So what we see the loss of old school style, A pictures, craftsmanship, multiplicity of different stories, and all of that. That is why I consider 1993, in my personal opinion, and the ending of financial interest in syndication concurrent with the lack of enforcement of the Paramount decrees to be the time the industry jumped the shark. I'd be interested in hearing your opinions for what you think the event that caused the industry to either, maybe it hasn't, to either go crazy or redeem itself.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain. Swan